It's nice to see you here this afternoon for today's reading with Meg Howald and her guests. First, before we get to this, I have to note that our series is sponsored by the Canada Council for the Arts and also by the London Arts Council. We're very grateful for the support, and today in particular, I want to note that we depend on support from our own college, and I want to mention a few names. In particular, our Dean, Helen Pierce, our Chair, Stephen Patterson, Assistant to the Chair, Holly Tunstall, and Operations Manager, Kim Otto. I have to say, without their support, we'd be out in the parking lot or on the lawn today. But now, today's guest, Meg Howald. Many of us know Meg as a colleague who teaches writing, art history, and creative writing. But gosh, I didn't know this much about her. What a fountain of creative energy. She recently has an article in this new edition of a London magazine. She's worked in theater and TV and produced a considerable quantity of interesting prose fiction, and we're going to hear some of that today. Meg's reading I think is particularly exciting. We've run this series for over 40 years, and there's 3 firsts today. As far as I know, Meg's the only one to give away books. But that just hasn't happened. She's also the first to be interviewed on CBC about her reading for Letters and Arts this morning on Ontario Morning. So that's 2 firsts. And the last one, which I'm just so impressed by, is she's the first person to offer her work with multiple voices. That hasn't happened either. And I'm looking forward to this so much, so I'm going to step aside and ask you to welcome Meg and let her explain how things are going to go.
Thanks for joining us. It means a lot. I have these wonderful, multi-talented guest readers reading for you today. Professor Andre Cormier, just hold up your hand, Andre, is a local independent actor, a 2-time Brickenden Best Actor nominee, who garnered much praise for brilliant performance in A Few Good Men, a play that went on to win Best Drama this year. And Professor Laura DiTrolio. Laura has acted in various community theatre and fringe festival productions in London over the past 12 years and has appeared in several local television commercials. She is a regular performer and member of the sketch comedy troupe Project G-Force. Maria Piccoli Zimmerman is a professional actress, singer, acting both for stage and film and commercials. Recently, Maria starred in a film short, The Celebratorium, that premiered this month. You can catch Maria's concerts at the Aeolian Hall in June and November. Tanisha Cunningham is a unique, provocative student here at Fanshawe with a passion for art and performing arts. She plans to pursue an acting career. Steve Ketty, a student at Fanshawe, is a 2-time Creative Writing Award winner and is developing a science fiction series with a working title, Project Mosquito. Book 1 is nearing completion. My first novel that we're going to read from is Are But Shadows. It's set in 2008 in Toronto's West End, when paranormal disturbances disrupt Ben Needham's personal and professional life. A team of scientists arrive at his door to sweep his house for anomalous activity. Because of their findings, Ben involves the police, and after forensic testing, they determined there was a murder in Ben's house 50 years prior to 2008, and so they open a homicide case. Andre and I are going to read about the disturbances in Ben's Toronto West End home, followed by Maria reading about how one of the presences seduced Ben into having sex, and it wasn't entirely against his will. Andre and Maria will finish the excerpts as Ben and Dr. Rose Henhock She is the lead scientist. She's also a well-known psychometrist, a person who can understand the history of an object just by holding it. Someone died in my house. Ben Needham finally admitted it to himself as he stood on the leaf-stained sidewalk and looked up at the third story of his home. The November drizzle shivered into him. Someone not ready to leave this world died in my house. He felt an icicle forming inside of him, cell by cell, suffocating the warmth out of one another. Someone unwilling to pass stayed. Tiny microspasms took hold of his weakened gut. He felt thin-souled. He shivered again and stayed, he repeated in bewilderment. And on the covered veranda, he stared at the lock on his front door, his lungs constricted, breathing came shallow. A sudden fragrance, sweet and old, filled the air around him. His thumb and forefinger pressed the small key with trembling hesitation. He knew in advance that his home was being invaded. Each day he stared at the front door lock, wondering what new and disturbing evidence waited for him on the third floor. The house was being invaded, but Ben Needham thought he had neither the experience nor the courage to deal with it. And as he hesitated, he watched a perfectly round bubble of blood form on his thumb where a tiny cut had healed a week ago. Shit, why is this happening to me? And as he drew it towards his mouth, he watched the bubble disappear. Now I'm angry. His tongue curled behind clenched teeth, as if snarling helped steady his hand, calm his gut. He needed a horse tranquilizer to do the trick.
Two strange phenomena happened simultaneously that morning. The first was the song Annie had played. It wasn't unusual for Annie to play by ear. She was a prodigy. Had been playing since she was 2, but to knock off a tune she hadn't heard before was something I couldn't understand. And why would she lie about hearing it from my studio upstairs? The second phenomenon was the sudden appearance of a pool of water in the middle of the studio floor between my easel and art table. I had a dream about it, and there it was. I didn't notice it until I turned on my work light and saw a reflective flash on the floor. I was amazed that the water was self-contained. It didn't run down the slight, natural slope of the floor. I was transfixed. The familiar dream washed over me and sent tremors through my face until I felt I was showering in ice water. I couldn't blink. I couldn't move. Then release came, as if I were floating. This was the first time I felt weightless, like particles. Dust covering in sunlight, like when I was a boy and my dad told me to press my arms against the inside of a door frame and step away. My arms floated upward. It was like that. Except it was my whole body. Like particles of dust in sunlight. I dropped to the floor and smelled the water, something faint, like lavender maybe? Lavender and spice? Nutmeg? Ginger? Like the fragrance on the front porch. I reached out to touch or not to. My fingers neared and hovered at the edge, then slightly caressed the surface. The clarity clouded. From nowhere, a drop hit the center of the pool, sending microwaves to the rim. Then a collision and splashing. I fell back at the pool, turned red, and my hand dripped with the scarlet liquid. It wouldn't shake off. It began to congeal. As I grabbed the towel and wiped my hand, the pool disappeared. The towel turned white again. What the fuck is wrong with you? Are you crazy?
Ben tried to remember subtle changes in the house before the dream started. There were some things, subtle things, he had dismissed as imaginative flights or underfed hormones. There was this fragrance like talcum, lavender again. and twice. It was stronger in the attic than downstairs. At one point, it was so strong that his nostrils burned. He remembered that now and pinched them, remembering the sensation. And there was this shadow he had seen twice, not anchored on the floor or wall like normal shadows, but suspended in air. He had laughed and thought leaf patterns had been playing tricks on him, and the radiators banged, not on the first 2 floors, just in the attic. Never where Annie was. He was grateful for that. He remembered working late one night and falling asleep at his desk. When he awoke in the morning, he was naked on his bed, and he felt he had been seduced like a drunken lover, asleep in a harbor whore's arms. Ben decided that no one in these circumstances would have been suspicious, and anyone would have at first chalked it up to lack of sleep, loneliness, rebellious perceptions. But the dream, the music, the water he had witnessed was not perceptual pathology. It was some sort of invasion. He mused how all of these small details, out of the range of routine familiarity, got to him and made him wonder about his safety and if he'd live through another night or day in this house.
The power of someone's residual memory. Power. An energy, a ghost left behind somewhere in his house was seducing him from his work, and he let it. He felt naked and exposed to the presence of things gone by and now returning to do something needed. Fragrances like warm arms wrapped around his head and turned him toward his bed against the south wall. Not resisting, he followed while a burning heat like an accelerated sunburn worked its way up his body, from his feet to mouth, then held him in an intimate embrace. His clothes fell away. Lowering himself to the bed, he welcomed the warmth, the smells, the pressure of intimacy weighing him down and moving him into pleasure's reach. He felt needed. The wine, the sweet smell of intimacy subdued any fears. He heaved, rolled down from side to side, kissed someone he couldn't see. Let his loneliness dissolve in the phantom's arms. Heard himself say, I want you. And who are you? What do you want me to do? He remembered falling asleep, feeling like a calendar had kidnapped him into another year. Hi, I'm Dr. Rose Henhock. You must be Ben the ghost tamer.
Welcome to my circus. Leave your coat on, it's foggy. It's breezy.
It's called a moon wall. I felt it as soon as I entered. It feels like we're swimming in the Dead Sea. It's as though the magnetic pull of the moon had sucked out the dampness from the graves. I've seen it before. This is my team of investigators. Martin operates the thermal imager to pick up the black body energy. Justin is on the night vision camera and will work with Martin to rule out any anomalous shapes. Emma works the electric fields and the ion counter to test for byproducts of any presences. Bert is responsible for the video camera to capture any RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. And I determine the history of the object by touching it. I'm a psychometrist. I explore items that reach out to me. When we finish our first mapping, we'll compare notes, then do a second sweep to determine if we need to call in a colleague of mine, Joseph Hightower.
I'm glad you're here. Do you want me to go up with you?
No. But turn off the power and stay down here. Don't join us for any reason. Stay here.
How does it feel doing what you do? It must be terrifying.
We're like a team of miners looking for life after a cave-in. Rose slid open the doors of the crawl space in Ben's studio. Nothing was there except a tin box with mere fragrance inside. She examined the contents, gently nudging each piece aside, then took a fragment of mirror and placed it in the palm of her hand. A until it grew hot. As she closed her eyes, she called to Bert to videotape. A different world began to spin into existence, a world of relentless heat. Sweat formed over her body, her blouse moistened and stuck to her skin. Something undid her hair until her hair fell about her shoulders. She was in a world of elephant trains, and she felt as if she were being tossed atop a huge cow under a merciless sun. She reached out to grab at some invisible pole, perhaps an umbrella to steady herself as she jostled along. Streams of colorful silk fell about her. Flutes and nets and snakes charmed her. A noble frame of gold and carved relief of elephant heads and tusks floated into her hand. A gold frame and a mirror. She looked into it. Images floated in and out as she mapped its history. A date, 1947, and a number, 305, floated like carved feathers around her. She called them out as she saw them. Then the image of a woman, powder chalk white, laid her hands crossed on her chest. Satin folds of a coffin cradled her. A little red-haired girl watched the dead woman, and as the woman's face faded, the child's face replaced it. The child stared at Rose from within this foreign world. As she stared, she replaced the woman in the same coffin, pale and lifeless. She grew into womanhood in the coffin, and when she opened her mouth to speak, a torrent of blood filled the mirror, transfusing itself to Rose's veins that swelled and bruised. Blood, hot and wild, broke through the membranes of Rose's eyes and raged down her face. Bert kept taping and counting the seconds of hemorrhaging. The mirror fragment flew from her grip as she tried to open her eyes, tried to breathe more slowly, tried to cool the blood boiling through her. She was choking. Bert felt faint. Panic stopped taping. Rose went into shock, her arms flailing, her throat choking on someone else's blood. Bert shouted for Emma, "Get the kit!" Emma forced Rose to the floor and turned her on the side.
The second novel we're going to read from is The Drowning of Margaret Hannah. Drowning of Margaret Hannah is set in London in 1881 at Victoria Park, May 24th, during the Victoria Day holiday. The Victoria steamer, sank in the river that day, and hundreds of people lost their lives. The mystery of the story revolves around a young boy by the name of Amos America, who is a survivor, manages to swim to the shore, and when he looks into the river, he sees a man that has gone into the river and purposely murders this woman with raven black hair. The entire novel is about bringing this man, whom we know about at the beginning of the novel, to justice. We're going to, I want to read the opening of the book, followed by your group here reading for some of the survivors and one person who didn't survive but still gives a first-person account. We're going to also read for the perpetrator, Garth Hannah, who is this psychopath and murders again as the novel goes on. It's going to end with an argument between Garth and his wife, Margaret. It was unlike any moment, unlike any day, unlike any tragedy. May 24th, 1881, London, Ontario. People jumped, were pushed, or dragged into the fast-moving current of the Thames River when the Victoria steamship went down. It didn't matter if one were a city librarian or a town whore. They were made equal in their desperation to live. Franny Hallmark jumped feet first into the river. She was one of the town's pleasure pillows, nobody cared to save. When she plummeted, she had been feeding her baby, her bare breast hidden under a stained patchwork quilt. Everyone on board the Victoria except the children had turned uncomfortably away from her as she plummeted, and she knew no one would rescue her. Crane Gilmore, the banjo player, who fell on top of Franny when the steamer went down, clung to his banjo instead of trying to swim ashore. He fell from the upper deck, was swallowed, stepped on, impaled, embedded, and hauled out 10 hours later with someone else's hand, plucking his banjo strings. From Springbank Park, the news traveled like Nevada stallions to the town's bell ringer in Covent Garden Market. It clanged and clanged until minutes later the square was filled with men and boys waiting for the apocalyptic news. The deputy chief, Nathaniel Good, half in shock, stood shaking and gasping on the front steps of the market while volunteers wondered where the chief of police was. "Gone," cried Nathaniel. "The chief's gone, his whole family too. The Victoria's down, she's sinking, hundreds are dead. They're still drowning." And he looked towards the river and started crying. Someone who thought he was going to collapse steadied him until he got his breath. We need every rider to get help for the rescue lines. Bring ropes, blankets, whatever you can find. Bring them to the north and south banks near Cove Bridge. Those few men closest to Nathaniel knew by the looks of his muddy, tear-stained face that he had lost Mary, that she was stuck under someone's heels or lay broken in half by a fallen timber at the bottom of the river. Only those few friends would have known he'd been courting Mary Watkins, a quiet affair that slipped in and out of the town's shadows. Most didn't know his tears carried personal loss. When he finished, the volunteers scattered, leaving Nathaniel sitting alone, his face cupped in his hands as spring dust whipped up, like ghosts already haunting him. 50 riders set out to neighboring towns and farms, and nearly 100 men with horses, carriages, and wagons descended on the cork-strewn hills of Springbank Park. Along the north and south banks, men held ropes around their bellies and formed rescue teams, 10 men deep, wading into the river. The strongest swimmer led each team, and as the afternoon progressed, the lead men dove like synchronized dolphins into the currents, searching the dark, thick undertow for the lost. When the bellman's hands turned red, he stopped and listened to the raw cries of the rising death toll. He wept for his own son, who had strict orders to be on the ship's last trip home. The bellman waited in terror to receive confirmation of his fears.
I wasn't supposed to be at the park that day, but I lied to my parents so that I could meet Nathaniel. I was on the upper deck of the Victoria when everyone rushed to portside to watch the Waverley steamer overtake us. The Victoria had been listing with the weight of 100 passengers. It started to heave. So many people. Water rushed into the south side of the lower deck. When everyone raced to the port side, the port bow went down. I grabbed onto the awning pole, but it dislodged. I tried to jump away from the deck but fell straight down, holding the pole like a Joan of Arc ready for war. I went down, down, the pole with me until I hit someone primal with instinct. Hands clawed at my feet and anchored me in their dementia. I forced my weapon to get leverage. It hit someone below. I couldn't look. I grabbed at clothing, at legs and arms until I reached the surface. I was a poor swimmer, hardly able to stay afloat, but I started toward the bank. And when I began to sink, I called for help. A woman saw me, a raven-haired woman who called for me to hold on. I fought the sluggish current as she tore off her dress and shoes and started swimming towards me. Her hair loosened like a pirate's flag. It bobbed on the waves. I reached out for her to take my hand. I touched her hair, threading through my fingers, when someone kicked at me, kicked me away from her like an old dog. As my breath exploded out of me, I saw this man envelop a woman's head and neck with one arm and press her down under the water with the other. Terrified, she looked at me, almost pleading for forgiveness. I sank. I gulped mud and water, red with injury, strands of her hair floating down with me to the carnage below. When the river closed over, I lost sight of her and the man who killed her.
On the north bank, horses were hitched with pulleys there. We joined to the Victoria to try to set her upright. What was left of her. Throughout the late afternoon, more joined them until the bank was ripped apart with hoof marks. There weren't horses that went down from exhaustion and injury and had to be shot. And word went around that 2 men turned their guns on themselves. I looked for John and waited. Amidst the snorting horses and gunshots and bodies scalded and torn apart from the shipwreck's spoil, I sickened. Then I saw John. His hands were rigid in his pockets. His shirt was dirty and half ripped off. His head bowed and his mouth opened in an unspeakable oath and took the Lord's name in vain. Jesus Christ! Christ! He kept saying it. I let the rope slip away from me and folded him to me, this son, this robe with music for blood, who was so different from me. He was this gambler who was tough, like a stacked deck. He never thought twice about leaving the farm for a life he bought at a sorry peace. I'd never seen him so stricken. When he could finally face me, he took my hand and he led me through the nightmare east along the river's edge. There they were. My wife, my family, all still like they were sleeping. Drenched in sunlight, mud, bacon on them. And John spun me around as someone hit him and ran a distance from the sight, his stomach retching in terror. Lizzie, Mikey, Emily, and Rosie. I counted them. Make sure they were all mine. I looked at little Rosie. I thought how strange it was that a boat fell on her and broke her apart like a rag doll, but that willow stick holding a balloon lodged in her neck, yeah, it stayed there. You know, I wanted to remove it, but I couldn't. I wanted to touch them, but I couldn't. I felt dead as I lay down beside Lizzie, my hand almost touching hers. John stood up and walked beside the bank. He looked west along the river and was transfixed. I called to him. He didn't answer. I let him be with his grief.
I kept telling survivors I was John Ingram and asking if they'd seen anyone from the Ingram family. They barely shook their heads and refused to look at me as if they'd seen enough heartbreak for a lifetime. Loved ones lay in the grass beside the lost ones like they were welded to them. They took tablecloths and shawls and covered the bodies. It was a battlefield without weapons, a battlefield of water-topped lungs and swollen faces and mud-encrusted eyes. But amidst the foul air and deafening screams, I looked down the riverbank and I saw an amazing thing. It was a woman, a raven-haired woman. She was ripping off her clothes, her white skin flickering under the blowing leaves. Like a child in her petticoat, this woman ran and dove into the river and swam to a girl who was going under. She swam against the current, hardly taking in a breath. I was happy. My arms shot straight up in excitement. Yes, I thought. Yes, God damn it. I wanted to see one life saved. I wanted to witness a miracle. But a boy, young and lifeless, his face crushed like a mouse in the jaws of a cat, washed up at my feet. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him, and I wanted him to wake, but he didn't. As I carried him up the hill, people stopped to look. Is that my boy? Is that my baby? Robert? Marty? No one claimed him. I looked back to the river, to the black-haired woman, but she was gone. As I set the boy down, my father's calls brought me back to him, and I had to get the wagon to take my family home.
Mother had to put her arm around my neck for leverage. It became so humid she felt lightheaded. Trying to support her with one arm and carry the hamper with the other was a chore and a half. As the wind picked up, Edie had to balance the baby, the blanket, and Mother's parasol. When we started to board the Victoria, passengers rudely passed by, making me drop our hamper. "Oh, Viola, was that my china?" Mother whined. I heard Mother's trying to break under someone's boot, and I bent down and held onto it as we huddled together on the lower deck where there was no breeze. Sweaty bodies and liquored breath made it impossible to get fresh air. The boat started listing from side to side, making Mother dizzier. "Viola, I feel faint. Viola, do something. Viola." I felt helpless to make her comfortable. The poor woman needed a fan. The baby started crying, and Edith had no room to rock her. People began panicking and screamed the boat was taking on water. We squirmed and flopped like fish on lines and struggled for the stairs to get away from the lower deck, where passengers were dropping from the dampness from full bellies and wine-logged veins. When the ship lurched sideways, we knew we didn't have much time. We were toppling. A huge metal cylinder shot with such a force through the passengers that it pinned them and drove them through the boards and into the river. Water cascaded in, hysteria followed. I lost hold of Mother as someone pushed her away from me, her hand shaking frantically for me to grab on. I tried, but as she fell down and went over so quickly, I lost sight of her. Edie clung to the baby as people fell on them, trampled them, trying to fight for hand and footholds. Everyone was swallowed by the current. I braced myself. When we fell in, I dove under. I could see Mother to my left, still holding her arms out for me, and Edie to my right, taking her last breath and pushing the baby towards me. I was free to choose. I had to choose. I looked again at Mother, her last breath escaping. Then I turned to the baby, choking and spitting up water. I grabbed her and struggled to the surface, past desperate bodies that were rapidly sinking, scratching, pulling their way through skin and hair, trying to save themselves. I was a good swimmer, but the current was strong, and the bodies were thick, like a thick cut mass of lumber I had to dodge. When I broke the surface, I clung to a deck chair and tried to steer it towards the shore. I grabbed onto an overhang of branches and launched the chair firmly among them. I drew my cheek close to the baby's mouth. Miraculously, she was still breathing. I folded her into me and tried to sing something sweet. A voice calling for help drew me back to the river. It was Amos America, one of the orphans from Sacred Heart. His arms pumping like windmills fought the current. "Fight, Amos, fight!" I extended my arm as far as I could until my own sweet boy was able to grab on. The weight almost dislodged my chair. Springing up with all his might, he jumped for a higher branch, caught on, and scrambled into the highest foliage. "They're all gone!" he screamed as he scurried to safety. "They're all gone, Miss Viola!" Then he was quiet.
It wasn't a day that passed, from early morning to late night, that I didn't wish my wife, Margaret, dead. Well, I dreamed about it, waking up in a thrill-seeking sweat. The office, I daydreamed about MOs, arsenic, a pillow, a vertical fall, a blunt weapon. I never imagined a drowning. Until May 24th, 1881, Victoria Day. I had no idea fate would deal me a river, a catastrophe, and an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I didn't plan on killing Margaret that precise day, but when I quickly assessed my dreams, daydreams, and the harsh reality of my black hole of a marriage, I let fate seduce me into fulfilling my death wish and acting like any man of war would. Margaret became my enemy and needed to be erased. On the morning of Victoria Day, we packed our picnic lunch, blankets, games, and stage faces and set out to the park to join my boss, Robert Reynolds, and his wife, Joan, who owned the London Oil Company and who invited us to celebrate both Victoria Day and my promotion as president of the company. I felt the invitation was opening a social door for me and Margaret. Margaret wanted to stay home with our son, who was running a fever. I insisted the housekeeper take care of him and urged Margaret to play the adoring, devoted partner. Though adoration had fallen out of the equation long ago, along with falling out of love, out of one bed into another, falling out of grace with the Trinity, the in-laws, our dog. When she ignored me, my urgings became bare-toothed threats that she caught and slung back at me in her fiery Irish francophone way.
Do you think for a moment I'd listen to your pathetic dicta? Do this, do that, sit bay. I'm not your dog. By the way, hates ya. If you continue to pressure me, I'll leave ya. And there wants me and Peter to come home to Montreal. What do you say of that?
I'll tell you what I think. You're a vicious hawk. Watching my every move, digging your talons into me. I'm sick of your conceit, your self-righteous, blood-sucking propriety.
You didn't complain of my lack of it when you took me and got me pregnant. And then took my father's money.
It wasn't worth it. Do you see how strong I am? I could take these long locks and wrap them around your neck.
Do it! You coward, do it!
Thanks. The last novel we'll read from is one that I'm finishing off right now. Hopefully it'll be done this spring, and it's called The Republic of Wolves. It takes place in 1956 in Northern Ontario. Northern Ontario was also known as the Republic of Mining. The backdrop for this is a Norwegian man whose daughter was abducted from him after the war in Norway, has found out that she's been brought to Canada. And he takes the hostage with him into Canada. They get jobs on what was called the teaching train in Northern Ontario. CPR-CNR ran all of these teaching trains, school on wheels, in Northern Ontario. And so he's on this train teaching. They go from Sudbury to Timmins. He's there looking for his little girl. The backdrop of the story is human trafficking. In 1956, you had your booming industry in mining, gold, silver, a lot of wealth up there, a lot of corruption. So he's there, and he's with this woman, Elise Holt, who is his hostage. He has her with him until he finds this little girl. So people, we're going to go to the last scene first, if that's okay. Laura, with yourself. And Andre, you're reading for Dag. Yeah, and then if we run out of time, people will have to cut that scene with John Jameson. The novel starts off with a body being found by a logger, and she's 14 years old. And so you have this police investigation going on with this deceased girl. You also have Dag Lang there with searching for his little girl, and there's another plot. All these plots converge. All right, in Northern Ontario in 1956. But we'll hear this to start with.
Called the police when you didn't come home.
You're like a goddamn cat, only quieter. I met a man and went home with him. I have needs.
Liar. I know where you were and who you were with.
I don't give a fuck what you know. My son is safe and that's all I care about.
I'll never really know how innocent or involved you are, but I do know you feel exactly how my wife felt when our baby girl was taken from us. I know you feel like your world is ending, like motherhood is bombing you from the inside out. My wife died because of your husband. There will be retribution. Peter is not safe. Roman called and thought Jean was you. She got in here with the key you gave her. Her husband told her about sending his people to get Peter. I phoned my friends. They moved Peter in the night. He won't be going home today.
Bastard! I want my son! Give Peter back to me!
Find my daughter, you... Find my little girl. What makes Peter more vulnerable than Liv? Work harder, Elise. Bring her back to me.
You're a dead man.
I know all about Carl Epic. He has no idea what I plan for him, and you will do exactly what I tell you to do. But for now, I have something for you. Yeah, it's me. Get the boy and tell him his mama wants to talk to him.
Hello? Hello? Peter? Oh, my baby. Oh, my beautiful boy. Yes. Yes, Mom. Mom's still far away. Far away. But soon, honey, soon I'll be coming home, and Papa too. What? You've got a big shiny new kite and a red ball? Oh, red is my favorite color too. I love you, baby. Mama loves you. I know. I know.
Keep the boy safe. And my deepest gratitude. If anything happens to me, you'll never see him again.
I'm begging you. He's only a baby. Please, I'm begging you.
This is exactly what your fucking husband did to me. Don't you think I know what you feel? You think because I'm a man I don't feel lost like you do? I lost 2 loved ones. 2! Your husband did this to you. He did this to both of us. I'll kill him.
I can't go
Get
on.
up. It's not over yet.
They won't help. I need opium.
I'm not giving you that shit anymore. They'll let you sleep for a while. When you wake up, I'll have breakfast for you and a plan to get Carl Lovick before he gets me. You will help me. You will plan for your classes in 2 days. We will get back some semblance of a human being.
Thank you, Drew. People, we have time for 5-6 minutes for a Q&A, and would you, you're welcome to direct your questions at the guests. I'm here all the time. You can book in time with me to go over writing, publishing, and that sort of thing. But if you have questions, please direct them for anyone up here.